So welcome to week 4 of the Every Bits Counts challenge. This week I had a whole bunch of eggs I needed to use up. My girls had been very busy. So what we're going to make today are some little egg quiches that I like to eat for breakfast. And these are really great to make ahead of time and put into the freezer so that you can pull some out and have them whenever you want. So I'm just going to break up the eggs, and basically what you're going to do when you're first starting to make these is just like whipping up some scrambled eggs. You'll put in your milk, if you like to use milk, and get it all whisked into a nice slurry. And then the other great thing about this recipe is you can use any seasonings you want. And I do not measure, so it's kind of measure with the heart here. I use a little bit of seasoning salt. I use a little bit of pepper, or maybe a lot of pepper to some of you. I love pepper. And then I'm going to take and add some dried basil. And this is from the garden. And I actually did a video, complete separate video on drying and storing my herbs. So if you want to take a look at that, I'll try to remember to link that down in the description below. But also love basil, so we're just going to put a bunch of basil in here. And then I'm also going to put in some smoked paprika. I love smoked paprika and the depth of flavor that it gives. And again, just measuring with the heart. And we'll get this all whisked together. And there are more ingredients that I'm going to put in this, but as you will see, I did need to add a little more milk. I kind of tried to gauge the thickness that I have of my egg mixture, but I had forgotten I always add a little bit of garlic powder and onion powder to these as well. So we will get, oops, oh gosh. Well, that's what happens when you don't put the little shaker top back on securely. Guess I will wash that later. So we will get this all mixed together. And then again, what I was going to say was the rest of the ingredients that we're going to mix in, I will show you. But first we're going to take the egg mixture, and this is just my large Pampered Chef scoop. And pretty much it's almost a full scoop, but it's kind of hard with eggs. And I just put one in each one of the muffin sections. And this is a silicone mold, and I'm going to be honest, this is the very first time I have ever had a silicone mold and used one. And I did pre-grease the bottom. So let me know, do you do that to yours? I'm just curious. I did just to be safe. But so this is like little ham cubes that I bought at the store, and I'm just trying to put even pieces into each one of the muffin cups here. And the reason why I do this is because I have found that if I put it into the bowl with the egg mixture in the beginning, because it's so heavy, it all sinks to the bottom, and I can never seem to get even enough pieces in each one of my muffin cups. So I just take the time and do them separate like this. And then once I have that in there, we love feta cheese, and so I'm going to break up some of the large clumps so that it's smaller little pieces in each one of the individual cups, and then I will just sprinkle some in. And again, like I said, you can put any kind of cheese in here you want. You could put some kind of like chopped up spinach would be really good. I'm just kind of using what I had on hand and what everybody likes in my house. And adding also a little bit of shredded cheese. My husband is a huge cheese lover. I probably could have filled these things with cheese and he would have been happy. But just a little bit in each one of the cups. And then once I'm done getting all the cheese in, I also put a little bit more of the egg mixture on top to kind of get the muffin tins up to about 3/4 of the way, like you would with the cake mix. So I'm just going to work on getting the rest of these filled. And you will see when I am all done filling this, I still had a little bit of egg mixture left over. And we are going to do a little something with that here in a minute. But now, if you cook with silicone molds like this, you are probably watching this going, girl, how are you going to get that in the oven? And I realized that as soon as I tried to pick it up, it's so flimsy. And like I said, because I've never used one of these before, I was like, oh my word, what did I just do? I almost wanted to cut this part out of the video, but I thought, you know what, maybe somebody will get a good laugh. Maybe one of you did this when you first used one of these silicone molds too. But I ended up getting a piece of cardboard And oh my word, this was even hard too, but I very carefully got it slid up and onto the cardboard. Then once I got it onto the cardboard, I was able to then transfer it over to the cookie sheet. And it wasn't a whole lot easier getting it off because it did slop a little into the adjacent cups. But as you'll see, I just took my scooper and tried to put a little bit of it back where it belonged so that my little muffins were as even as possible. So lesson learned, I guess, trial by error. I now know that I need to put my nice little silicone mold on a cookie sheet. So this is what they look like when they come out of the oven, and of course they're always a lot puffier because it's like a quiche style. And then as they are sitting cooling, they flatten out a little bit more. And once they are all done, then I take them out and put them on a paper towel just to wick up any excess moisture since I'm going to be freezing these. You can see the damp spot on the paper towel there. And then I'm going to transfer these all over onto a lined baking sheet. And then I'm going to take these out to the freezer. Now this I had to show you. I recorded this previous to this recording, but this is what happens if you try to use cupcake papers. It is a flipping nightmare. Oh my gosh, the paper just kind of gets soggy and wet and it's disgusting. So don't use paper. Trust me. And then this is what it looks like when they come out of the freezer, and we will get them all packaged into the vacuum seal bags and labeled up and put back into the freezer. Next day I needed to pick some of the Roma tomatoes that were ripe, so I went down into the garden and I picked a bunch. Some of them aren't 100% ripe, but I went ahead and picked all that I could see that had mostly turned red, and I will let the rest of them finish ripening up in the house. But I needed to get these because we were going to have a brief rain shower, and it was just enough that it probably would have split all of the skins on these. So in order to preserve them and make sure that I didn't lose them to splitting, I just got them all picked. So I also picked some of my black Krim, and these are now sitting ready to ripen, and I will sort through the ones that I need for this next recipe. So now I'm just going to work on taking the green stems off of the top of these tomatoes that I'm going to be processing today. And there were a few little tiny ones that were already wrinkly, so I'll just set those aside for the chickens. But once I get all of the tops off, I am just going to give them a quick little rinse to get the field dirt off of them. Even though the skins won't remain, I just like to get as much dirt off as possible before I start to process my tomatoes. And then once that is done, then I'm going to take my tomato core, and I am going to work on taking the core out of all of the tomatoes. And some people just splice them with a knife. I just use my little tomato core, so whatever works. Let me know, do you use a knife and just prick the tomato in order to, now this is for blanching, so we're going to throw them in some hot water. So do you prick them with a knife, or do you actually have one of these little tomato cores that you use like I have? Then once the water is boiling and hot, I just dump them in here and I just flash boil for 30 seconds. I try not to let them go too much longer than that, because if you do, the tomatoes are really hot and then they kind of tend to get a little bit on the mushy side. So I'm letting them stop the heat process in cool water. I don't know why, but the ice maker on my refrigerator got turned off. I think my husband did it because he hates the sound of it in the middle of the night. But I didn't have any ice to put in my water, but it still worked, and just with cold tap water. And you can see how easy the Romas are my favorite. You just pinch their little hind ends and the tomato comes right out. The round ones are a little bit more difficult. I believe these are my Better Boy tomatoes. For some reason, my bush this year, when all of the tomatoes started coming right from the first round of blossoms, they were just these little tiny tomatoes, and so I'm just going to have to juice them, and then these here we're going to make Italian stewed tomatoes out of. Now this is a black Krim, and I had to cut the top off of it. I don't know why, but the very bottom half of the tomatoes were ripe, but the tops still had a lot of green on them, so I just cut them off so that I could use them, and we're going to continue to chop up the rest of this bowl. Now we're ready to load the jars, and I'm just putting a little bit of hot water in the bottom of a very hot jar, and then I'm going to start filling it up with my chopped up pieces of tomatoes. And I probably could have sifted out the juice in the bottom and used the juice in kind of instead of the hot water, but didn't have my other bowl out, so I just opted to go for the water. And I did put a tablespoon of Italian seasoning in there, and then continuing to put more tomatoes in there until I get up to about the 1 inch of head space. And then I'm going to take my ever so handy dandy chopstick that is plastic, and I'm going to work the tomatoes around just to try to get as many as I can in there, because there usually is a lot of airspace when you have large pieces like that. Then I'm going to add a little bit more water in there to bring the liquid level up to the 1 inch of head space. And then once that is good, and then I'm adding 1/2 teaspoon of citric acid to the top to bring the acidic level of the tomatoes up to canning standards, using my 4 jars canning lids, putting my rings on finger tight, and then using my jar lifter because these are so hot, and putting them into the canner. And I won't bore you with the whole canner load, but I am just going to show you the tail end of one more. Again, 4 jars canning lids. I can't say enough good things about these. I'm working on getting a discount code for you, but I don't have one just yet. Putting the rings on finger tight, and I'll get this one in and then work on the rest. And this is what they looked like when they came out. Now the next day I needed to pick corn. We had a lot of corn ready, and this corn is the most amazing corn I think I have ever had if you like sweet corn. Its brand name is called Obsession, and I get it from Haas, and I will try to remember to put the link down in the description for that as well. But I was just down in the field picking, trying to find the ripe ones. I actually do succession planting, so I plant a whole huge swath of corn every week for about 5 to 6 weeks. This is an 80-day variety, and oh my word, I had the first 2 successions ready at the same time, and even a couple in the 3rd succession were already ready. So I had to pick a whole big crate of corn, and then once I was done picking it, we took it up onto the upper deck so I could sit under the patio umbrella to block the sun. And then I just started shucking and dehairing, and I had on my real fancy headphones so that I could listen to some of my favorite YouTubers and some music while I did the corn. The cat also hung out with me for a little bit while I was up there, but eventually we got it done. Then we took it back inside. So now I'm going to throw them in a pot of boiling water for 3 minutes just to blanch them really quick and get those enzymes stopping. And then once they're done, I'm going to put them in the sink and allow them to cool a little bit so that I can handle them. Oh, I need to buy one of those corn shucker little things. I've seen them on some other videos and I don't have one yet. I just still use a knife. And you can see I have it like the tip of the corn in a bundt pan, and it makes it a lot easier to have control of the corn, but the corn was kind of going all over the counter, so I finally got smart and stuck it inside my big bowl, and it did catch all of the corn from flying everywhere. But the one thing it could not catch was the corn juice going everywhere, and I mean, it was all over the counter, all over the floor. My feet sounded like I was walking through a nursing home hall. It was just insane, but well worth it. This corn is so good, and it's that type of corn that even after you can it, it doesn't go soft or mushy. And sometimes sweet corns, when you can them, they can kind of discolor a little bit and turn brown, and I have never had that problem with this sweet corn. It is so amazing. It stays crisp and crunchy. Even 2 years I've had these in jars before we finally finished them, and they were still tasted just like we were eating them off the cob. But I put a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and it's canning salt, into the bottom of the jar. Got the corn filled up to the 1 inch of head space, topped it off with hot water up to the 1 inch of head space. And then once I got that done, I took my little chopstick and I just worked it very lightly around. They tell you not to pack it, but I just wanted to make sure that I got as many bubbles out as I could. And then I took and of course wiped my rim. This is just a hot wet paper towel. Put on my 4 jars canning lids. And of course my rings finger tight. You know the drill. And these are so hot, it's so hard to even touch them to put the rings on. But I'll get these all put into the canner, and we will get these processed. And now once I got all the jars in the canner. This is what I had left over, and we are going to stick this in the refrigerator, and that will be used in a recipe coming up a little bit later in the video. But see how pretty the corn still looks when it comes out of the counter? So I apologize, I am not down here at the greatest time of day to be filming. The lighting is horrible. But this morning, the one thing that I'm going to preserve is my pears. And I just dropped one. But let me turn you around here. So this is my pear tree, and I know a lot of you are really new to the channel, and I appreciate you all. Welcome, welcome. I got this pear tree from my daughter when she worked at a farm store, and I have no idea what kind of pear it is. It was a dwarf pear, and this is as tall as the tree has gotten. Last year it took a huge break. This year it is putting on some pears. But if you watched any of my earlier videos, which I'm sure some of you have not, but I was kind of commenting on how most of the pears here are just these little tiny, like bullet rock pears. They drive me nuts because they aren't like a good eating pear to me. So what I do with these is I just harvest them, and then I set them out to ripen, and I juice them. And I mean, other than making that or pear butter or something, I'm not sure what I would do with them. So if you have a pear tree that's similar to this, that just kind of puts on smaller hard pears, even when they're ripe, they're a little on the firmer side, what the heck do you do with them? I'm just curious. If I'd love some different ideas of what I could do other than juicing and canning the juice or making like a pear butter. But see what I mean, how little they are, how many I can fit just in the palm of my hand, and my hand's not that huge. All right, that's it. Okay, so I am showing you my little bullet pear on the left and a pear I got from my mom on the right. And this is a whole tray of pears from my mom's. They're Bartlett pears. And last year I was smart and I saved a couple of seeds, and I'm actually growing 2 Bartlett pear trees from those seeds. So I'm excited to get those in the ground and use those in the future. And here you can see I just spread out the pears as even as could be. And I think what I'm going to do is grab another bread tray and put these down here in this small tote into another bread tray so I can stack them all on top of each other so they're not everywhere in my house. Next day I had a turkey carcass that was in my freezer that I needed to use up, and then this spring I took a whole bunch of my celery from the garden and froze the little bits and pieces and stems and wanted to use them in some stock. So that's what this is. I'm just throwing in some of the celery. And then I also saved my garlic scapes from the garden this spring, so I'm going to throw a few of those in there. And then from my carrots that I harvested as well, my daughter had peeled these but hadn't eaten them yet, so I just decided to chop them up and throw them into the stock as well. Then once I got that done, I went downstairs and I grabbed 2 just of the little tiny onions that we harvested in last week's video. And I just wanted to save the bigger onions for when we do salsa, probably in next week's video, because I have lots of tomatoes and peppers coming on strong in the garden. So I just gave these a rough chop because they cook down so easily, and threw those in the stock pot as well as a bay leaf. And then I took some ground up thyme, some ground up oregano, and then I took some parsley. And all of these I grew in my garden and dehydrated myself, and I have a completely separate video on that. I'll try to link below if you're interested in watching that. I threw in some salt, and then I just covered everything with water, and then I let it cook down for about 6 to 8 hours. My teenage daughter was very thankful by the time I was done cooking this because she told me it stunk really bad. That's a teenager for you. But anyway, I just wanted to show you this wooden spoon. It is so cool. There was an older gentleman in our church when I was young who had no family, and he was just the sweetheart, and we called him Grandpa Levi, and he carved this for me for my birthday one year, and it is just this treasured spoon that I enjoy using in the kitchen. So after the stock was done and we strained all the pieces out, This recipe calls for 6 cups of stock and 6 cups of water, and I just used all stock to give it a richer flavor. So we have 12 cups of stock, and then it calls for 3 large boneless chicken breasts, and I put the equivalent of 2 in here. And if I don't feel like it's enough when we go to cook up the soup, I can throw another jar of canned chicken in there. It calls for 1.5 cups of diced carrots, 2 cups of diced celery, and then it calls for 2 14.5-ounce cans of Rotel tomatoes, but I didn't have those. That's why I did some freshly chopped peppers. It calls for 2 cans of rinsed and drained kidney beans, and then it calls for 3 cups of corn. This is 2 cups of this is what I had left over from canning the corn earlier, and then I went and grabbed another jar and topped it off with the 3 cups. And I'm going to stir this all together, and then I did boil and skin a whole bunch of fresh tomatoes just to get some more used up for this recipe. And because I didn't use canned Rotel tomatoes, this calls for 4 cups of fresh chopped tomatoes, so I ended up doing 6 cups to make up for the canned tomatoes. Then I put in a 1/4 cup of salt. I put in 1 teaspoon of ground cumin, and then I put in garlic powder. I didn't go downstairs and grab any of my fresh garlic, but I just used some garlic powder. And then I also didn't use 1 large onion, and I just used, I believe, 3 tablespoons of onion powder to compensate for that large onion. And then you also want to use 3 chicken bouillon cubes, and I actually had incorporated that into my stock before I put it in there in the beginning, so that was already there. And then I'm just going to let that cook for about an hour. Once it's ready, I'm going to start ladling it into the jars, and you can see how hearty and just kind of thick and full this soup is. And if you prefer soup to be a little bit more on the liquid side, you could definitely add more broth to this recipe and then maybe just up your spices a little bit. Or when you are ready to serve it, when you open the jar, you could then add a little more broth at that time too. But I'm just going to do the usual. I'm going to get this filled up to 1 inch of headspace. I'm going to debubble it, top it off if it needs a little extra bit topping, and it looks like it does. So we will get that done. And then even though this recipe doesn't particularly have anything really greasy in it, I did go ahead and just use a paper towel with vinegar on it just to be safe. Then I took my rinsed 4 jars lids, and I always like to rinse them to get any factory debris, metal, grease, dirt, anything, not really dirt, but metal or grease or any particulates that might be on there off so that it doesn't interfere with the seal. Put my rings on lid tight and then loaded up my canner and repeated this 7 times, and this is what they looked like when they came out. And let me tell you, it tastes just as good as it looks. This is a really fun soup that we love to have on cold winter's days. And then I also canned up another 7 pints of green beans. But this next recipe that we're going to make is a zucchini tot. And what I did is I shredded up 2 cups of zucchini. And you really want to get as much water off of this zucchini as possible for this recipe. So you can either put it in a kitchen towel, or I just put it in some double layer of paper towels, folded it all over the top, and then really gave it a good hard smash. And just tried to work as much water as I could out of the zucchini. Now when I turn it over, you'll see that the bottom of the paper towels are really pretty wet already. So I did get as much out as I could, and they say it could reduce it down to about 1 cup of zucchini, but I found that mine must not have been that watery because I still ended up with probably 1.5 cups of zucchini. So I put that into the bowl, and then to that I added 2 eggs, because my eggs were kind of a medium size and it called for 1 large egg, so I went ahead and did 2. It calls for 1/2 cup of breadcrumbs, and these are seasoned breadcrumbs, but I did still go ahead and add a teaspoon of Italian seasoning to this as well. And then I added 1/2 cup of shredded sharp cheese. You can use regular cheese if you like, and then I decided I'd just go ahead and throw the rest of the cheese in there. But then that was 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, and then this is 1 teaspoon of seasoning salt. And I had forgotten when I made them last time that it was a little on the salty side, so next time I would just use 1/2 teaspoon probably. It's much better. And then 1/2 teaspoon of ground black pepper. And then I love smoked paprika, and they say to just use some paprika for garnish on the top afterwards, but I like to put it in the mixture so that that flavor just kind of gets mixed in throughout the whole tot, and I just find it really good when they're done. Then once it's all mixed together, this is like the larger size spoon, I guess maybe like a soup spoon. I just grab a scoopful and kind of roll it into a semi-ball, and then I press the top down lightly with my fingers. Now, if you like them more crispy all the way through, you could actually flatten them a little more. I found when they were like this and just slightly flattened, once they came out of the oven, there still was a little bit of like a soft texture in the center, I guess kind of like a regular tater tot would be. But I just continued to make these little rounds, and this is what I got out of one batch. I ended up making a double batch, and this is how glorious they are when they come out. That cheese just really gives it a nice brown coating, a little bit of crunch on the bottom, not horrible, but a little bit. And I baked these for 25 minutes at 400 degrees. Now you could bake them up to 35 minutes, but because I'm going to freeze these and I'm going to pull them out and cook them again later, I didn't want them to be too overdone. So here's what they look like when they are all on the cookie sheet ready for the freezer. Then we got them packaged up and put back in for meals for another day. I cannot believe that is the end of week 4 of the Every Bit Counts challenge. I am going to again link the video down below for the herbs if you're interested in watching that. Otherwise, I just want to let you know I appreciate you hanging out with me today, and I will see you next time. Bye.